Welcome to the Thrive in the Workplace podcast, brought to you by The Wellness Theory in partnership with B1G1 Business for Good. This podcast is all about uplifting organisations to thrive when it comes to all things workplace well-being, from organisational culture, the most effective wellness campaigns you can imagine, and integrating social good. You will find insights, inspiration, and information that supports leaders at all levels to implement best practices to improve engagement, performance, and vitality within the workforce. We believe that workplaces can and should be healthy and sustainable for both the workforce, the bottom line, and the community. And in this podcast, we'll show you how. And just so you know, for every listen this podcast gets, we'll be donating to a life-saving project aligned with the UN 2030 global goals. So thank you for being here and continuing the ripple effect. Without further ado, join us to thrive in the workplace and become a force for good in the world. Today, we are joined by Scott Armstrong, who's a founder of Mentl, which is an advocacy platform that aims to tackle the stigma of mental health and promote cultures where everyone can thrive. Scott, I'm so happy that you could join us today, and I'd really love to kick off this conversation with you perhaps sharing a bit about your personal journey and what's inspired you to create Mentl, and what is that all about?
Okay, so Mentl is a platform, as you say, where we basically the DNA is to try and tackle the stigma of mental health, basically by having honest conversations and speaking about mental health. For too long, it's been, hidden. It's been a private pandemic, and there's all sorts of statistics that back us up on that. And I'm very happy to get into the statistics. You know me as a former journalist. The personal story behind Mentl, it started about four and a half years ago. When my father, who was a very successful CEO, very sort of typical 1970s stoic British guy, didn't talk about his feelings, all that kind of thing. Very, very strong individual, successful, had a mental health breakdown, and within 3 months he was dead. And we only recently found out, actually, on this year's summer holiday, that he was being treated for depression before his death, and that's something that we didn't know at the time, something he kept secret. And I remember looking down at his body in the open casket at his funeral, and I'm basically talking to myself, and I know he's gone, but thinking, we never talked about this. We never, there were a few things that we cleared up in our lives, because we had this relationship that went, childhood wasn't easy, but adult relationship was fantastic. But we'd never talked about this. And it was like, why? What stopped me from talking to him, and what stopped him from talking to me? And that also then sort of there was a bit of a perfect storm. I changed jobs, which meant I re-examined who I was when I was no longer linked to a job title. His death started getting me to ask questions of myself and where I am, where I was at with my own mental health. And then once you kind of see it, you can't unsee it. And I'm looking at my kids, and I'm looking at a very difficult, challenging world that they're growing up in. And I'm looking at my dad, and I'm thinking, well, they need more tools than my dad or I had growing up. So I guess that's where Mentl really, really sort of was born, really, that day. And then since then, it's been just a journey to a year ago where we launched. In my previous job as an editor of a business title, which shall remain nameless, I'd really, really tried to focus on human beings, talking about mental health, talking about the future of work, talking about this, the human side of the business world, which didn't necessarily fit so well with my former employers. So the more someone tried to take that off me, the more I was actually convinced that this is what I wanted to do. I think I'm hitting 50 as well, and I promised my daughter I'm going to live to 150. So I basically thought, with the second third of my life, let's try and do something that could actually make a difference and has a bit of meaning. So that's kind of where we're at.
Well, it's definitely adding meaning for sure, and not clearly just to your own life and your kids' life, but to everybody you're touching through your platform as well. And thank you so much, Scott, for sharing what you did with your dad, because it's very raw, and it's something that's very close to the heart. And in my experience, I think those who have been touched deeply by the effects of mental health are often the ones that are then fueled to act and really make a difference, like in this space. Yeah. I wonder if you're seeing that pattern actually with those that buy into what you do at Mentl.
Do I see a similar pattern? Oh, well, quite frequently when I sit down with people, and it's amazing how quickly these days the conversation gets to people's mental health. And I think there's two different reasons for that. I think one is that perhaps my antenna is more up to it now, so it's we kind of get there quicker in a conversation. But two, there are more people struggling than ever before, so more and thankfully more people are beginning to talk about it because they really need to. As I say, I call it the private pandemic. My dad's generation never talked about it, to the point where it will kill them. I think my generation, possibly the first generation that, and I'm not a boomer. My boy keeps calling me a boomer. I'm a Gen X, but I think that we're the generation that's finally at 50 beginning to wake up to this. And then I think as we go down the spectrum till we look at the Gen Zs are very, very aware of what's happening. But yeah, it's surprising and not surprising just how many of us are touched by trauma of some respects. And you can do one of two things with it. You can do what society's always told us to do with that, which is bury it, don't talk about it, suffer in silence, and then 30 years later it pops its head back up and you have a breakdown. Or you can begin to talk about it and you can begin to work on it. And when I say talk about it, the first person that I've realized I need to talk about my mental health to is me first. And I learn to kind of check in with myself and go, do you know what? Yeah, there's something here and it needs some work, because if it doesn't, it's going to dovetail its way and sort of impact work, social life, personal life, home life, parenting. I think it's that kind of like, we are the foundation of every other role that we have, whether that be father, parent, brother, sister, husband. So we need to have that conversation with ourselves first. But yeah, I am seeing a lot of people that are receptive to it. I got a bit of a stark, not wake up call, but a really interesting figure that came through the other day, which was, so in my previous job for an entire, for the last year, 365 days on LinkedIn, I would often talk about the business story of the day. And I was working for, I was running a leading business title. And then a year ago, I started with Mentl, and all I've been talking about for the last year is mental health. And LinkedIn turned around and said, you have reached 1 million people in the past year, and that is 750% up on the people that were listening to you when you were talking about mainstream general business news. So are people more willing to go to this conversation? Do people need to hear this? I genuinely think they do. And I think the statistics back it up.
100% they do. And you essentially, with the work that you've been doing, is you give other people permission to speak about it themselves. For me, one of my biggest bouts of burnout came from, like you described, is essentially burying emotions, trauma, anything from the past, and then that rearing its head really at the most inappropriate timing in my life when I was in leadership roles, but there was nobody around me that I could speak to about it. But what's quite interesting is what you said there, Scott, is like talking about it to yourself first is absolutely essential. The thing for me is that I didn't have the skills to really do that. I didn't understand what was going on within me. I didn't have that awareness. I don't think I didn't have the maturity. I didn't have the emotional literacy to be able to actually describe and articulate what I was experiencing. It became really hard to try and reconcile that. So the fact that you're openly having these conversations, and it's what we do here at Wellness Theory as well, both with our workplace wellbeing and with our coaching side of the business, and it's something that really allows other people to then enter the conversation, because they know that there's some form of understanding there's some compassion there. It's almost like, okay, they know the depths as to what we've experienced too.
And I think that's the biggest message we keep, and this kind of started, right? So my journey of mental health started with my dad. Mental health as a kind of storytelling focus, or just the thing that showed me that other people had the need, which was really interesting, was Dr. Celia Afridi from the Lighthouse Arabia wrote a column for my last title, which was talking all about how it's not so easy for people to stand up to bully bosses in this, in this part of the world, and the mental health tolls of that, because our existence out here is linked to your visa. So if you lose your job, your kids lose their school place. And that creates a lot of pressure for us to basically soak up and try and endure toxic cultures rather than change it. And that really spoke to me and really resonated with me because of a couple of past job experiences. So I kind of posted onto LinkedIn. Not other social media platforms are available, but that is my favorite. And basically just said, if you're going through this, you are not alone. And I talked about. I basically said, look, I remember when WhatsApp kicked off. When the WhatsApp message pinged in. It was a physical reaction. My entire body would tighten. That was what anxiety wasn't just a mental, it was a physical. And it got to the point where on a nighttime when I was trying to go to sleep, I could see the boss in the corner of the room glowering at me. Such was the anxiety. And I posted that, and the response on LinkedIn was incredible. And it was lots of people coming and going, I thought it was just me. I thought it was just me. I thought it was just me. What's interesting about what you just said was, Charlotte, that you said, like, it presented itself at a really inopportune time when I was in a leadership position and there was nobody around me that I could talk to. The irony of that is that probably everyone in that room, or at least 2/3 of the people in that room, you could talk to, because they're actually going privately through the same thing. And we've seen the figures. Like, the World Health Organization tells us that globally 1 in 4 people are suffering with their mental health. Here in the UAE, the statistics put that at 1 in 3. And they're the people that present to the system, to the medical system, who seek help. There was a recent study by McKinsey, which was here in the UAE, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and Kuwait. And 66% of respondents in that survey said they were struggling with their mental health. And this is McKinsey, hard-bitten professional services, management institute. So it's not that like they're going looking for an answer. They got honest answers from the world of work. And the world of work told them that 2/3 of people, the majority, are now struggling with their mental health. So we keep coming back to, you're not alone. There are people in your immediate circle who know, if not exactly what you're going through, can empathize because they're going through their own struggles.
Yeah, 100%. And what's really interesting is how the stats do back it up. It's not just personal experience, that and people's anecdotal experiences and stories of what they've been through, and it's something that I think does definitely bring us closer together, which is really, really helpful. So I'm curious to know, Scott, because obviously the work you're doing is definitely bringing people together and continuing this conversation and elevating it. What kind of initiatives and strategies do you use at Mentl? So if somebody's listening to this and they're thinking, wow, that's me, I thought I was alone, I'm not. What kind of things do you do at Mentl?
Well, a number of things. I think, again, you raised a really interesting approach. What we try to do is give people permission. So I'm not, look, and again, I'm a journalist of 33 years. Please forgive me for that. One of the most toxic professions in it. I like to call myself a friend of mine, Anne-Marie, recently called us ourselves recovering journalists, because I'm so tired of what journalism has become. It's so polarizing. It is not good for society. So, but what we do is try and do that storytelling. I'm not a clinician. I have probably more questions than I have answers. But as a journalist, what I can do is look at the world of work, look at all the research, look at all the studies, and then try and present that in an engaging format that people can connect to. And I can bring my own story to that to show, yes, you do have permission to talk about this. So what we often do, we are curating events for different companies that want to open up. But the thing we like to do most is sit down with the C-suites and get them to give their people permission, to get them to open up about what they're going through, because that actually makes them a more effective leader, more empathetic leader. This whole idea of chief executive officer is now chief empathy officer, but then that then models the behavior for the rest of the teams, which is really, really important, because often even if the CEO is at the top of the organization and says, yes, I want you to go and do wellness, the middle management will often go, yeah, but does he really mean it? And he still wants the P&L. Sadly, I use the word he deliberately there, because if C-suite was largely female, I think we'd be in a much better place, because we'd have a lot more emotional intelligence in the boardroom. But that it's trying to tackle that and cascade permission to talk about these things and create those psychologically safe spaces, as my friend Andy Fieldhouse talks about and works on. And I'm sure you do the same, try and create that atmosphere where people can actually share, be themselves. And that is really, really powerful. What we're trying to do right now as well is we've launched what are called the Mentl Awards 2023. And these are for all industry sectors. And what we're trying to do right now, sorry for the shameless plug, but is try and extract best practice from all the different industries, because no one person and no one company has got the right answer. And there are so many different dynamics within the different industries. But we're trying to extract that best practice so we can put it in a room and then go, do you know what? Let's raise the bar on what excellent looks like inside the private sector. And we need to do that because, frankly, we spend a third of our lives inside the workplace. Was it 40,000, 44,000 hours we're going to spend at our desks or in our places of work? So it has a tremendous impact on our mental health. And yeah, we all have our own responsibility to our mental health, but that does not absolve workplaces from their responsibility.
It really doesn't. And it's so interesting that you say that, because we always talk about you can't be what you can't see, right? And for a lot of people, they're not really in environments, even in the family home, where they're openly talking about mental health, even physical health. So if we're not seeing it in our home environments, the next place is work, right? For most. So I love what you're doing with Mentor Awards, because ultimately you're showcasing and spotlighting role models, right? And role models don't just show us the path, they light the path for us so that we can learn and we can understand and take it, like you said, like to that next level, which is absolutely brilliant. So can you tell us a bit more about the Mentl Awards? Because that's coming up in October, is it not?
In November the 8th is the gala dinner. 38 categories. 34 are sort of industry. So, look, if startups, energy, property, construction, healthcare, tourism, travel, logistics, manufacturing, engineering, as a huge, we're spreading ourselves far and wide on this one to get as much best practice as we can. Education, universities, schools, we want to hero what they're doing. And we also have individual categories for people who have overcome barriers to succeed, with mental health challenges. We've got mental health advocates, we've got mental health heroes, empathic leaders, because sometimes these conversations do get a little bit boss bashing. And actually we want to hero the leaders that are lighting the way. So we're going to hero those. And yeah, the nominations are open now. They close September the 22nd, but we'll see if people start asking for an extension. We'll see about that. And we've just announced today that Brandy Scott from the Business Breakfast is also going to be the MC for the event on the night, because we are targeting the business sector. We are trying to get that best practice out. And I think if we can do that, and it'd be surprising where you find best practice. I've been surprised where we have found best practice. I've seen amazing stories of wellness inside corporations that are heavy engineering, where people are working in difficult physical conditions. I think one of the really interesting things we've found as well is that, this idea that well-being and mental health should be taken off HR through no fault of HR's, but then who made HR people mental health experts overnight anyway, and given to health and safety. And I've seen when companies do that, see, health and safety doesn't come with a P&L demand. It doesn't have a KPI to make profit. It's there to protect. It's there to mitigate. It's there for the well-being of the company, not necessarily to make a profit. And I think also in general, when health and safety departments speak, most people listen because we recognize that that's for our physical safety. Whereas I think, rightly or wrongly, and there are some brilliant HR teams out there for sure, but there is often a belief inside, or a perception inside some companies, that HRs can be policy police, and they're not necessarily on the side of the employee. They are there to ensure that the employee abides by policies. So it's been an interesting journey to see where exactly best practice is. So that's what the Mentl Awards is all about. It's about raising the bar on what good looks like in industry. And if as companies listening to this and they want to enter, then mentlawards.com, mentlawards.com. Shameless plug over.
It's not a shameless at all. And I really hope your team are carving out a special award for you, because honestly, like, just I'm not hearing of anything like this happening in the UK, for example, or in the US, to this level and to this standard, in the way that you're showing up and creating this and doing it in a way that's modern, that people are engaging with, which is really excellent. But Scott, you mentioned something about profit, right? So
Yeah.
there'll be leaders listening to this and they'll be thinking, yeah, this is a nice idea, and maybe they're not quite there yet. Maybe they're on the fence and they know it's important, but they're not really sure where to go, where to start. Give us some interesting insights into the ROI on
almost my favorite topic to the business world, and I kind of come at that with because a lot of my career was business journalism. So a big part of my mission is the ROI of all of this, and we've developed actually this real-time calculator that kind of ticks up in the background, and often we'll sit with the C-suite and just have this running up. So here in the UE alone, and let's remember we're a population of 10, 11 million max. Here in the UE alone, the cost of disengaged employees to business is $10.3 billion a year. It is like 1.125 million an hour. And we've actually got a formula that we can show, like, how many employees have you got in your company? Well, this potentially is how much you are losing. So there's a huge cost, which that is based on figures that were captured by the Gallup's global study. We then look at the cost of replacing talent. There is the cost of losing talent to your business. But then if you turn it on the flip side and we look at the return on investment, you don't have to take it from me. Okay, so my heart is open to mental health. I'm obviously biased on this. However, again, we go back to the research. We look at McKinsey, EY, PwC, Boston Globe Consulting. There isn't a research house out there that hasn't done a piece of research on this. Cigna, Bupa. The common goal anywhere is, or the common finding is, that the return on investment is between 300 and 400%. You invest in this space, your return on investment is up to 400%. My favorite figure is 364%. And that's because that was the figure that came back from a study of studies, which was a study that looked at 100 studies done over the last 10 years, and then came up with the average return on investment that all of those 100 studies came up. So 364%. And I still to this day don't get why chief financial officers are not screaming at this to their C-suites going, yeah, but if we invest this, then we get that. I mean, frankly, is there a cryptocurrency out there that's offering a 364% return on your investment? I mean, we did this masterclass, and I think, like, last year, stocks and bonds were down, I don't know, maybe 10%. Gold was up 5 or 7% or something like that. But again, like, you want to have a look at, you want to make some more money, then invest in this. And it's, again, don't take it from me. There's a really interesting guy called Mark Mobius, and he's called the godfather of emerging markets. And this is a man that took $100 million and turned it into $10 billion. He is an investor, and he actually invests on a very cold calculating basis. So he looks at companies, and he used to have an ESG index. He now has an ESG plus C index, which is ESG policies plus culture. And he tracks those stocks over 10 years. And the companies that embrace ESG, but also have healthy cultures, do better on the stock market in terms of shareholder returns and profits than those that don't. And let's remember, he is a professional investor, who deals with hundreds of millions of dollars, will not invest in a company if he thinks they have a bad culture. And he will use a whole bunch of metrics when he makes that decision, including the Glassdoor scores of a company. And if nothing should not strike terror into the hearts of HR departments, it's your ability to raise investment would be linked to what people say when they leave your company.
Wow. So workplace wellbeing is a good deal. It's a sure thing, isn't it?
I keep saying it is good business to be a good business.
I love that. So, Scott, what's the challenge? Let's say somebody's been listening, they were on the fence, they've just heard those numbers, they've heard like the personal, benefits of it. But what do you think the biggest challenges are as to why perhaps business owners, CEOs, C-suites are not as invested in this as they could be?
Well, look, it comes very much down to personal stigma, to be honest with you, as well. I mean, if you think about the C-suites, still currently tend to be people that look like me, of a certain age, that were told to bottle up their feelings. And again, what's fascinating is that McKinsey also did another study, which came out about 4 months ago, maybe, which looked at the top 10 leadership traits and issues that leaders needed to tackle in order to succeed for the decade ahead. 6 of those were linked to emotional intelligence. And one of them very, very deliberately spoke to leaders and said that leaders themselves need to go on a self-journey. They need to get more vulnerable. They need to get more empathetic. And perhaps not everybody can do empathy, but you can be aware of empathy. And even if you are someone that doesn't get it, and it's fascinating as well with C-suites, because not everybody is called to leadership. Some people are more, shall we say, resilient, or are they like my dad, who was a CEO, who is just very good at bottling it up until it breaks? So they sometimes don't get it here, which is why, again, it's important to bring it back to here and the business case for it. But it is education, and it is talking about it. And then it's, once you've realized that you are going to talk about it, it's making the time to talk about it. Cigna's got a really interesting campaign going right now, which I love. And actually, I think it's really, really valuable for all of us, not just in a business setting. But they've got their 5% pledge, and they're calling on leaders to devote 5% of their time purely to focus on well-being. Now, they don't tell them what they have to do. They just said, in your Outlook diary, you are going to put 5% of your time to this. Now, in any given leader's diary, and based on a average working week here in UAE, that equates to 2 hours and 24 minutes. And that's also taking out holidays. 2 hours, 24 minutes every week that a leader would just go, right, time to switch off everything else. What do we do about mental health and well-being of our teams? What am I going to do? What am I going to do for myself? What am I going to do for my teams? What conversations am I going to have? You build that time in, again, so that's 2 hours every week. That's your leader devoting up to 100 hours of their time in that year to well-being and mental health of an organization. And that's just the leader. If you then cascade that into your senior leadership team, and there's 10, say that's 10 people, then you've 10x that amount of time. That's a really, that's a huge amount of time that we could do something really, really huge with, which can make a massive difference to the culture of the company. And to be fair, I think we also are getting a little bit, I know we talk about well washing, where companies just tick a box. But how many companies have you been in where we have a pool table in a room that nobody dare play on? And I think it's fascinating that Companies have got to stop looking for the quick fix and actually be very self-reflective and look at and be honest with themselves. That old adage of the first step is admitting that you've got a problem. As you just said, if you can't see it, you can't fix it. So it's spending the time to be self-reflective, because even they can put all the mindfulness training in the world, or they can put people on time management courses, and all of these things actually make things worse, because essentially what that says to the employee is it's your fault because you can't cope with the pressure, as opposed to looking at the culture and going, have we created something that's toxic and is not good for people? And it doesn't matter how much time management training or mindfulness we give them, they're not going to be able to cope. And there's evidence out of the Oxford University very recently. They've got a wellbeing research center that said that projects like that, if you're not tackling the underlying culture, they're actually counterproductive and make things worse, because again, you're putting everything on the employee and you're telling him it's their fault, not a shared responsibility.
Oh, yeah, Scott, like you're preaching to the choir with the conversation with me. So I hope everybody's listening to this, rewind and listen to that clip again, because it's so important. It's funny because one of the reasons we got into workplace wellbeing was similar to what you mentioned around like the self journey. Is we actually was coaching more one-on-one, and we was working more and more leaders that were coming to us extremely burned out. And when they started to get the results that they needed to be able to sustain themselves in such a healthy way and lead from such a strong place, they were then asking us to come in. And now it's like, now do this with my team, please. And for a long time, we did a lot of like stress management stuff, some burnout prevention, and almost like workshops. And we got to the point where we're like, we're being part of the problem because it's not being looked at from a big picture perspective, which is one of the reasons why we decided as a company to properly do workplace wellbeing rather than to kind of go in and help out the leaders that had already kind of enlisted us. Don't get me wrong, the people in those workshops, seeds were planted and some of them got great results, but the reality is long term for the business, it wasn't going to give them the success they were looking for, which is one of the reasons now why we integrate the organizational culture, wellness campaigns, which we do in a similar way, which I really enjoyed. Actually, I attended the 5% Pledge webinar that you actually did with the guys over at Cigna, and it was excellent. And I actually then modeled the setup and the way you did it with kind of like almost like a panel discussion. And then we would clip that with leaders within companies. We will clip that up and we will then distribute that. So they're spending their 2 hours of that week, their 5% pledge, by actually creating content essentially that they can then filter down, so they don't have to be talking about their own well-being and championing the success of their own employees all day every day, because actually now all of that content can be repurposed. It can be really landing with people in different ways when it's done creatively, and it's had a massive impact. And the third thing that you mentioned earlier when we were talking about the investor was the ESG, and we also integrate the social good into the workplace as well, where we can and where the leader is on board with that. And it's absolute game changer. It's been an absolute game changer for the kind of results that our corporate clients are getting. And it's been really, really powerful. So I really love like the way you just described that, because it is absolutely necessary for it to land in a way that makes sense for the company. And I think you do that really well.
Well, if we look at, right now, our minds are a little bit focused here on the UE on ESG, because, and quite rightly, will be the big focus, shall we say, of COP28 when it comes to Dubai Expo City. But the S is just as important. And if we think about sustainability, now, if you are in the C-suite, and if you're a C-suite listening to this, you have a responsibility to the sustainability of your company. You have a responsibility for it being around in 10 years' time. If your culture stays the same as it was for the past decade or the decade before, you are not doing your job correctly, because you're not going to attract the talent. You're not going to attract the next wave of talent. You're going to have a culture of fear where people don't raise when things go wrong. And you're going to, which we've seen impact businesses over and over again. You're going to have a culture of silence where people will be afraid to try and innovate. And I always, I talk about Kodak saying no to the digital camera, or Nokia saying no to the smartphone. And we saw what happened to those companies. So again, there are pure economic business reasons why companies need to take this seriously, because you cannot run a company like you ran it 20 years ago. And if you think you can, you're living on borrowed time. I call them zombie companies. They are literally shuffling off to their own demise. And the talent, and again, we see this from the statistics. You don't have to take it from me, but Cigna do their well-being research, the 360 well-being research study every year. And they showed that 50% of people last year wanted to leave their jobs. Oh, actually, if you go 2 years ago, they asked people, do you want to leave your jobs for a better work-life balance or a better culture? And 50% said yes. Now, if you're a hard-bitten, C-suite guy who doesn't get this, you roll your eyes and go, well, it's just a survey. What does it mean? Except they went back and spoke to the same people the year after, which was last year. Out of that 50%, 4 out of 5 had all moved. And let's not forget, we live in the UAE. There's a massive amount of opportunity right now. They've done a great job in creating mobility for talent. And when they asked them last year, how many of you this year are thinking about moving on, that figure had gone up to 55%. It's funny because, again, if we put we keep laying the blame at leaders' doors, and there is a fair share of responsibility there. But talent doesn't like this, but leaders don't like this either. And again, this whole idea of when you talking to leaders about burnout, again, Bupa have their executive survey every year, and they found that 55% of bosses wanted to move on. They got their own term for it, which is the boss loss, where C-suite talent is also heading out of the door. So at what point, this is almost a little bit, I always feel like the mental health conversation right now is kind of where climate change was 5 or maybe 10 years ago. At what point does the overwhelming amount of evidence click in and we have, the COP28 for well-being? When do we begin to realize that this isn't just something that's anecdotal? It physically manifesting itself in companies, and it is not good for companies. You can go one way. You can spend money, you can burn money and burn people, or you can make money and make people.
Mic drop right there for anybody that invested.
I just came up with that. I quite like it.
I love it. I really do. So, Scott, one of the other really key important areas for you that you focus on at Mentl is men's mental health. Now, I think there's many vulnerable groups within the workplace, but men are a very, very important group for you. So you can tell us a bit more about that.
I've gone on a journey with this one as well, because it's fascinating. And actually, I will say that a lot of my education actually almost started with women and menopause. And there's a great lady called Sharon James who started, we started talking about the male menopause. And it's interesting to see that men's journey with the menopause is not as dramatic as perhaps women's are in terms of what happens biologically, but it really, really happens. And the difference, one of the key differences I see is the toxic masculinity that we've all been raised with makes it really, really difficult for guys to open up and even have that conversation with themselves, because we are taught that we should not fail. We do not want to fail the people around us. And I cite the example of, say, someone in my position, a guy who's in their mid-40s. If you think about the responsibilities that individual's got, so they will possibly be a manager. So they've got a responsibility to their team. They've got a responsibility to the P&L. They've got a responsibility to the board and possibly a toxic leader above them. They're then a husband, a father. They've got school fees. They've got increasing rent year on year. As we all know, the cost of living is going up. And that there is a lot of responsibility and a lot of stress. And where in that equation is the guy? What is that? Because if that individual fails, then all of those roles and responsibilities also fail. They are the foundation of everything else that's built. And when we look at the statistics, it's just terrifying. Last year, 700,000 people committed suicide. 77% of them were men. It's now one of the leading, suicide is now one of the leading killers of men. It's one of the leading killers of kids between 15 to 25. Doesn't matter what geography you look at, whether it's the UK. And that was a big one for me as well. Even in the early days when I kind of came across these statistics was, one of my boys is 22. And he went through university. And when I came across this statistic, it's like, oh my goodness, in the UK, it's the biggest killer of young men between 18 and 25, suicide. It's also, a huge killer of men aged between 40 and 50, which is just when we're going through that sort of, it's clumsily called the midlife crisis, but we are going through physical changes. Our body is slowing down. The moobs come, the brunch belly comes. We look in the mirror and we don't quite like what we see. We've got less energy that we want before. We've risen up the ranks in toxic companies, so we can't talk about what's happening. And we're told that if we do, we're weak and we're failing, which is utter BS. So we have a lot of guys who end up trapped. They are trapped in their own lives and can't talk about it. And we did a men's retreat where we just took men out of their situations, and we did lots of great stuff. So we did physical stuff with them, which was fire and ice saunas and ice baths, and we did yoga on paddle boards, and it was brilliant. And shout out to Simon Dunn, formerly of the Lighthouse Retreat over in Ras Al Khaimah. But the biggest thing we did, which was the most impactful thing, was basically just a talking circle. It's called a cacao ceremony. So we have this really, really strong dark chocolate with it as well. But we kind of talked about, okay, what are the things we're grateful for, but also what are the things that are going on with us? And it was amazing that all these guys who were vice presidents and they were leaders in their fields are going, I've lost myself. I don't know where I am anymore. And I think the most powerful thing they took away from that was, again, okay, so it's not just me. It's not me that's the failure, because it's not them that's the failure. I've had imposter syndrome all my life. I have considered myself a failure for a lot of my life, despite the evidence. I've done some pretty cool stuff with my jobs. I've had some pretty cool achievements, but my focus and my self-language, which I think is rooted in the toxic masculinity again, is awful. Men's self-language is terrible. We call ourselves losers. We call ourselves things that we wouldn't say to our worst enemy. And it's only like the last 2 or 3 years that my self-language and my perspective has really begun to change on that, where I've begun to trust myself. I've begun to value my own opinion of me as opposed to somebody else's opinion of me. There's a great lady called Ray Kubasi who runs this, Raise Your Health. And she interviewed me for a podcast back in my previous life. And she asked me a question which really, really threw me. And it was a really, really powerful question for for anyone to ask themselves, which is, okay, Scott, so you're an editor-in-chief, you're a husband, you're a father. That's all very well. But outside of that, at 3 a.m. in the morning, who's Scott? Mm-hmm. I was like, but you know what? I'm not sure I know. I think I used to know, but I'm not sure I know. And that was really, really powerful. And I think that's another thing that guys in particular, but not exclusively, struggle with, is that our identity, sorry, phone ringing, our identity is so linked to our job role. It was so linked to where we don't realize that our job is not who we are, it's what we do. And the minute that job, I was fortunate, I changed careers only very, very slightly. And this was, again, in the last sort of 3 or 4 years in that journey. And the job was great, but when I could no longer identify with the title that I'd given myself for most of my life, I was all over the shop. I didn't know which way I was up. I didn't know who I was, what I was doing. Felt really, really like a massive confidence knock, and I'd been the job previously, I'd been at the top of the tree, I'd been an editor-in-chief, all that sort of thing. And then I left that industry to go into strategic communications at Hill & Knowlton. Great culture, great company, no problems there. But internally, everything was crashing down because, again, my self-identity had been ripped up. Now, ultimately, that was a really positive thing that happened to me. And I'm so grateful that I did it. because I think that then gave me, like, even now with this business, like, okay, so I've changed from what I've done once, I can change again. And all of a sudden you have this flexibility. It's almost like remote working. You can work from anywhere and you can do almost anything. It breaks the shackles of what you think you can do. But yeah, there's a lot of guys out there that are just trapped in their own lives. And when I look at the suicide statistics and when I look at the statistics on men's mental health, we're 4 times more likely to complete an active suicide than men. We are 3 times more likely to commit suicide than women. And the pandemic, which was awful for everybody, there's big statistics showing just how much men struggled because, again, all that fear of failure. And we've just been taught we cannot fail and we cannot talk about it because it makes us weak.
Yeah. And those statistics are heart-wrenching. They really are. And it's, I've experienced suicidal ideation along my journey, and it's a really hard thing to really come back from.
Yeah.
That's even the right term for it. I'd really love, Scott, for you to share, like, what's been the most important things on your journey. So you've definitely, like, painted a really nice picture of, like, where you were, and I assume, like, you're still on this journey from the way you've spoken about it, but what have been the key things that have been helping you the most? So if a man is listening to this and they can really identify with the story that you've just shared, like, what have been the key factors that have helped you the most over the last couple of years?
Look at the evidence. You're not a loser. Be kind to yourself. When you're having that conversation, be kind to yourself, give yourself a break. And the more I look back on, that gives you then permission to back yourself. But it's just, I've done lots of things in my life and I still feel like somebody else did them. Those good things that I did, like every guy, like every human being, I've made mistakes and I've been occasionally an idiot, but I've also occasionally, actually more frequently, been brilliant. And I've been but it's trying to change that. We talk about glass half full, glass half empty, but it's trying to change that self-perception of us from the fact that, that actually 70% or 80% of what I've done in my life has actually been positive. I am a good dad. I adore my kids. I've done great things in my career. When I look back at it, I go, do you know what? That was actually really, really cool. And it's beginning to realize that actually you don't need to push all of that away. Humility is brilliant, but humility, when it comes to the point where you're almost self-flagellating, is not great. And I think, guys, there's enough people in the world and social media will tell you, and again, we've got all this comparison going on. So we look at the world and it's like, well, my life's not as good as theirs, particularly here in the UAE where, everything is brilliant and everything is sparkly and it is fantastic. And we've both been to the UK and none of us want to move back there right now. But it's that, okay, just focus on what you've got, focus on what you've done. And over the last sort of 2 to 3 years, and particularly with Mentl, it's been a journey for me, I think, in particular, just going, do you know what? You can do this, and there's a British self-effacing thing that will always be, or the imposter syndrome will always bat off the compliments. But at times, you don't need to be a narcissist to actually believe to believe in yourself. We've all got a shade of ego and we try and push it away, but it's just beginning to believe in yourself and back yourself and just be kind to yourself. There's a great guy, and I know you probably know Mark Colburn, MBE, who is a Paralympic cyclist. He won gold. He broke his own record in the Paralympic Games in London to win gold medal for his country. And he worked with a guy called Dr. Steve Peters, who wrote the chimp paradox. And it's basically, they talk about the fact that the insiders, there is a duality. There are 2 parts of us. And one is the emotional side and one is the logical side, the human side. And the emotional side, the chimp, Mark calls his Dave, wants what it wants when it wants it. And it doesn't necessarily make the best decisions for us. And he said, and this Dr. Steve Peters taught him that he had to talk to his chimp and recognize, he almost, so I don't know whether it's dissociative or something like that. Psychiatrists would tell you better what it all means, but it's basically going, you're okay. It's talking to yourself and going, are you physically safe? Yes. Are you emotionally safe? yeah, you are. Is the anxiety that you're feeling right now justified? And when I talk, for me, it's looking back on the evidence of my life and going, right, is my self-opinion justified? I'm now, I'm coming at it with a really negative view of myself. Is that justified? And that's a great period, because you can look at you can reflect on the things that you've done wrong, and we all should reflect on the things that we've done wrong and look at how we can fix them and get better at them. That's all cool. But at the same time, take comfort and solace in the majority of your life, which is you actually have done some really, really good stuff, and you have reached some people, and you have been amazing, and I think that's part of it, is just trying to deal with that insecurity, deal with that, which 9 times out of 10, I don't know. In my case, a lot of it I know comes from my childhood and comes from childhood experiences, which set the tone for a very inconfident individual, whom then masked for most of his life with boisterous behavior and with trying to seem to the outside world that he got everything down, and use of alcohol to tackle inhibitions, but it has been a mask. And I think talking to myself and beginning to realize, what does the mask look like, and then how do you kind of, I don't think anybody can take the mask off all at once, but how do you begin to peel it off and get to you, really? And then once you get there, it's like, yeah, in my case, it has been, I don't need the pat on the back. Who doesn't want the pat on the back? But I don't need the pat on the back and the validation not nearly anywhere near as much as I did, literally up until maybe 4 or 5 years ago. It took the death of my dad to snap me out of that. So,
well, there's so many insights there, Scott, that anybody will be able to relate to, but also be able to learn from. Self-kindness is absolutely paramount for anybody when it comes to their mental health, because we're so biased on seeing those negative things. And if we are operating from more of a survival state, we become a lot more narrow-minded, and then that becomes the thing to focus on, right? And then that amplifies. So when you're having those conversations with yourself, that really, really gives the power back to where are you focusing, because you see where that conversation's unfolding. And if you've got enough self-awareness, we can almost like step out of it and see the ego at play. You can see young Scott when he's a kid going through those experiences that maybe planted some seeds of insecurity and things like that. You can start to see and build those relationships and start to befriend those parts of ourselves. And I think it's something so natural, and it's very much part of the human experience.
It's not easy though. And for anyone, it isn't an easy process to go through. Like it wasn't an easy process to change careers and have that self-identity ripped up. But, we sometimes need to go through those difficult times to learn. I don't think I know anybody who just has a meteoric career. And okay, so I actually did have a period of time, and I could look at, it's maybe even 20 years, maybe a 15-year run, where it was promotion after promotion. You rise up the ranks, you win some awards, you do some great stuff, and it's bang, 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 bang. Everything's going in the right way, and that's great, right up until the point where nobody can keep rising. Eventually you're going to hit a ceiling of some form. Even if you are a top athlete, you hit a ceiling. If you've ever listened to Johnny Wilkinson, who won the World Cup for England, he has this really amazing, a podcast on different topics, but he talked about what happened to him when he achieved his life goals. When you reach the top, and there's, where else do you go then? And when you reach the top and you get there, the only place to go is internal then. And that's when you begin to talk to yourself, because otherwise you distract yourself with that race, you distract yourself with that climb. And it's actually, I'm maybe rambling a little bit now, but I think it is just really, really important to realize that you are going to have to deal with this at some point, or you're going to be my dad. And you're going to be my dad, and he came from poverty. He built his own business. He was a strong guy, worked all his life, built a global business. And then when he had his mental health challenges, he had no defense, no tools. It just broke, and it broke through his armor, and he was dead within 3 months. So.
Scott, thank you so much for everything you've shared in this conversation. Is there anything else that you would like to speak about that perhaps we should have, or perhaps that you feel you just would like to mention as we wrap up this episode?
Oh, well, enter the Mentl Awards, of course. I think it's just, we're at a real inflection point. So I think it is, if I circle back to just that one message, which is you are not alone, and talk. I think they're just the two fundamental things that I want people to do, and be brave enough to talk to yourself and be brave enough to seek solace from a friend. And sometimes you don't even need to talk about it. You just need to ask that. Again, another great friend, I think we both know him, Sam Browning. He talks openly about his struggles with mental health, and he's an amazing guy. And he just talks about going for a walk, just being there, just getting out, a little bit of physical exercise, which also kickstarts the system. But yeah, just talk, know that you're not alone, and know that actually, you are in the majority. This stigma has to end, because we keep telling everybody that it's just them when it's not.
Yeah. Scott, big thank you for your insights and your wisdom today. Everybody that listens to this podcast, as they hopefully know by now, for every listen this podcast gets, there will be a donation made towards one of the 2030 global goals. And Scott today has chosen global goal number 3, which is good health and well-being. And I feel like you've already made a good case as to why that's so important to you. But is there any other reason why you've chosen that goal?
I guess it's the journalist in me looking at society in general. I generally think that, we're living in a more polarized society than ever before. We've got social media putting us in one camp or another camp. And I think the more secure we are as parents, the more secure we are as leaders, that enables us to raise the next generation of more secure children, colleagues, apprentices, and that ripples forward. And if our children are more secure, then they are more they have a bigger shield against polarization. If they feel that they have the confidence to make up their own minds and decide what's right for them, rather than follow the herd mentality, which is being dictated by the polarizing forces in the world, my profession, the media and journalism, I just think we'll be better off as a society, and then that will free us up to make the better decisions on the other goals that you included, 1, 2, and 4, about the planet. If we can get to the point where society is a psychologically safe space where we can all have conversations and all have views and all then work towards solutions, I think we're going to be in a better place. And we'll also mitigate, the threats that everybody thinks that, AI is going to come and kill us off, because they're going to look at society and go, well, it's time for them to go. A bit grandiose, but yeah, really, I just think our kids are our future. They need better tools, but if we can raise them to be secure, raise them to be mentally healthy, then I think, because a lot of what's going on right now, politics, whether you look at the US, you look at the UK, all that sort of thing, it's basically down, it's a lot of insecurity, it's a lot of anxiety, it's a lot of fear. We have fear peddled to us all the time, because that's what social media and that's what the media thinks sells, clicks, engages. It's anger, it's rage, it's fear. And we need to come up with an antidote to that. And I think mental wellness and mental health can be that antidote.
Yeah, 100%. Definitely. Listen, our mission here at The Wellness Theory is to help people realize when they're healthy and well, they can be a force for good in the world. And everything about what you just said just irons it out beautifully. So, Scott, thank you so much once again. So grateful for you to come on the show today. We will
Thank you for listening.
Always. We'll make sure all of the links to everything is in the show notes, so anybody can come and find you easily. But thank you so much.
Brilliant. Thank you, Charlotte.
Today's episode was hosted by myself, Charlotte Stebbing-Mills, the co-founder of The Wellness Theory. If you enjoyed this episode, please do subscribe and share with someone who may benefit and be part of our mission to help people realise when they're healthy and well, they can be a force for good in the world. I just wanted to share some more about our partner, B1G1. B1G1 is a global movement that enables businesses to incorporate effective impact creation into their everyday activities in a simple and powerful way. Through B1G1, businesses can choose from a wide range of verified projects around the world and integrate these impacts into their business operations. The core concept of B1G1 is that every business transaction or interaction can be directly linked to making a positive impact in our world, whether it's providing access to clean water, supporting education, planting trees, or addressing social issues. B1G1 enables businesses of all types to make a real difference. To find out more about them, visit their website at b1g1.com. Until next time, be well, mean well, and make a difference that lasts. See you in the next episode.